Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I'm here for my NACL week number 9 overview and analysis video here in the summer split. I just first want to apologize for getting this out a day late. I really wanted to get this out yesterday, but we've been having a myriad of technical issues, and so this will be coming out just hours before the start of the playoffs, and this is the final week of the regular season, so I'll try to get all my analysis in that I possibly can, but I assure you, no matter when this comes out, I have not seen anything in terms of playoffs, in terms of expectations for that, and so I want to make that abundantly clear. We will be talking a bit about the bracket in the end, but of course, if you want to know my thoughts on everything that has happened in the NACL up until this point, check out the playlist up in the iCard right now. That's going to be, of course, every single week done in the exact same format as this video, so if you're interested in my analysis here and you want to see how we got here, at least in terms of my thoughts and opinions on these teams, check out that playlist. But of course, today, we're going to be covering the 4 series that happened in week number 9, finalizing where these teams are going to land in terms of playoff seeding and who will make or not make the playoffs. There still is one spot up for grabs, so quite a lot on the line. I hope you guys are excited. I know I am. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving my player of the series and my dud of the series for every single series, and at the end of the week, I will be giving my player of the week and my dud of the week for week 9 as a whole to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. And there will be a little extra addition at the end because this is the final week of the regular season. I'm going to include my personal all-pro team for the course of the summer split, and that will include an MVP selection, a most valuable prospect selection, if you will. So stick around for the end of the video if you want to know my thoughts on how things have broken down in the NACL, but we will, of course, also be previewing the bracket. Typically speaking, I would say that I'm going to show you my power rankings, you know, how they have changed and things like that, but power rankings don't feel quite as relevant now that we're heading into playoffs. I do want to talk about the bracket, and we'll kind of discuss who I think are favorites, who could potentially be moving far in the bracket, and all that kind of stuff towards the end of the video. But most of it, of course, will be spent talking about week number 9. So let's get right into it. I don't want to waste you guys' time too much, and lucky for us, in terms of the series of the week, we don't have to waste too much time because it's the first series of the week. The first series of day number 1 is the one I think everybody was most looking forward to. It's a matchup between Dragonsteel and Fear x Starforge, the two best teams in the league going head-to-head in the final week of the regular season. Dragonsteel looking for that undefeated split, and they are going to get it. They pick up the 2-1 series win. They move to 9-0 on the split, and yeah, they're entering the playoffs undefeated in terms of series. They have yet to drop 2 straight games to anybody over the course of this split. They've only lost 3 games in total. They're ending at 18-3 in terms of game score. This is the most dominant regular season we have ever seen in the NACL, and you know, Fear x Starforge is a good team, so when Dragonsteel comes out and beats them in 23 minutes in game number 3, you know that this team knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing. This is a team that's just dominant across the board. Every single position is stepping up and playing at an elite level right now, a borderline top-tier all-pro level right now, and that's the most impressive thing to me about Dragonsteel, is just how crazy everybody is playing at the moment. This is an LCS team in terms of quality and caliber. Player of the series to me is going to go to Zamudo in the top lane. This might be a bit of a controversial pick because, you know, game 1 on the Poppy, he certainly had his ups and downs over the course of the beginning part of the game, but he was pretty crucial towards some of the final team fights in that game to end up winning it for them. He was okay on the Cassante in game 2, but nobody was really standoutish for me on Dragonsteel in game 2, even with good score lines. But really, I mean, obviously he's getting this for game 3 on his signature Cho'Gath. A lot of people had question marks, me included, about what Zamudo was going to offer this team coming into the split. I was much lower on him individually as a player, not because I didn't think he had upside, but because the consistency had always been a real problem for him at the NACL level. It wasn't the good games that were a problem, it was the bad games, as I like to say. You were just getting way too many performances where, you know, you would have a great game 1 or a great game 2 and then a not good game number 3 or a really good game 1 and a not good games 2 and 3. Like, it was really hard for him to string together back-to-back good games, and you would just get so much inconsistency from it, at least in terms of what he showed before this split. But he has been incredible. A huge upgrade to Niles, in my opinion, and Niles was not bad at all. He was an upper-tier top laner at this level, but Zamudo has, quite frankly, maybe been the best top laner in the NACL over the course of this split, at least in terms of output, and I just didn't expect that. The team fighting is unbelievable. He led the game in damage on Cho'Gath in Game 3. That's not the easiest thing in the world to do, and Philip's not a bad top laner either, and so for Zamudo to be as good and proactive and strong as he was throughout this series, it's very impressive. I do want to shout out both Yuji and Spyrax. They were the other players that were in contention for me. Spyrax was awesome and probably the most consistent member of this team throughout the series. If you're looking for a player that was the least bad, it's definitely Spyrax. Not that Zamudo was awful, just that he had a couple of, up and down plays, and, the up for me obviously weighed that out, but if you want the player that didn't have any downs, that was Spyrax, who was just good throughout all 3 games. The Azir in Game 1 was awesome. He's so good at that champion. It really is kind of his signature champion. And the Yone was still very good in Game number 3 as well. Yuji was also incredibly important towards this team's success in the early game. I just didn't think he had the same kind of game-breaking performances. He also had a couple of, misplays in team fights. Fear was definitely targeting him in a lot of early situations. And so for me, that was a bit of the deciding factor. I just thought Zamudo was the most flashy player, and to me, the most standoutish. I mean, Jerry and Zyko were also very good, but they're always very good. Instinct definitely tried his best to carry it on the other side, but Dragonsteel just a little bit too strong, and proving once and for all that they are currently the best team in the NACL. And then for Fear, they gave it a good effort. I mean, that Game 2 win was actually really solid from them. Kind of felt like a T1-esque kind of game, as I talk about a lot on this channel, where it's close, and then it's over. Like, it's very funny how that ends up working out, but Fear, I think, did a great job playing around their super-fed AD carry in Instinct, who had a very good series, all things considered. I think most of this team actually played okay, but dud of the series for me is going to go to Winsome. I do not think he had a particularly good series. I think the Game 1 on the Leona stands out in more of a negative way, just not really landing a lot of the crucial engages down the stretch that actually could have won them that game. It was very winnable, Game 1 was. And I think if they do land some of those engages, perhaps this is actually like a 2-0 win for Fear, and we're talking about them as maybe the best team in the NACL, but it doesn't end up working out that way. I also don't think the Renata was particularly good in Game number 3, so unfortunately, Winsome, just not one of his best performances, even with Instinct kind of popping off. I thought everybody else was fine, though. Blaze Olive definitely a little bit below what he has been over the past couple of weeks. He has at times been the best mid laner in the NACL. That was very much not the case here. Spyrax definitely was more consistent. XU, Philip, they had their moments, XU specifically on the Karthus, but for the most part, Fear just tried their best and unfortunately had a few too many flaws and a few too many inconsistencies to be able to come out on top, but they showed they could compete with Dragonsteel, and I think with a couple of minor tweaks, a couple of things that they could clean up, especially towards the back half of some of these games, I think they could actually really push Dragonsteel in a best of 5, and so I'm excited to see that as a potential playoff matchup, but Dragonsteel, at least for now, really proving that they deserve to be the #1 team in basically every ranking. Then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and this was the other series of this week that actually had really big implications on the playoffs. It was FlyQuest Challengers taking on CCG Esports, and FlyQuest is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. With this loss from CCG, our playoffs are now locked. CCG is unfortunately eliminated in 9th place, which is really unfortunate. I honestly think that throughout this entire year, they've never been a bottom 2 team in terms of skill, but they didn't pull off the upsets that other teams like Winthrop were able to pull off, and so they're unfortunately eliminated, and it was always going to be a tough ask to ask them to come out in the final week of the season against a FlyQuest team that actually does need to win to secure their spot in terms of seeding, and ask them to win this series. That it just would have been really difficult, and unfortunately for CCG, the job is just not able to get done. They do have a roster substitution. We talked about this a bit last week. Manui is out because he was picked up by DSG in order for them to replace Tomo, who went up to 100 Thieves, and so they had to go and get a new AD carry. They got Rockboom, who I think is a very good AD carry, especially, as a replacement. He is a tremendously talented player to be able to just pick up and have, so I think they feel pretty good about that. Unfortunately, it's not going to be enough for this. Hopefully that pays more dividends as they move into the promotion tournament, the promotion relegation tournament going into next year. But for FlyQuest, this was a really dominant series, and quite frankly, we really needed to see this out of them because they have not looked particularly good over the last few weeks. This team has been very up and down. They've had real issues, and I think a lot of the strengths that they had in the spring split, they're just not really there anymore for this team, at least not consistently. They definitely can have them in spurts, as we saw in this series. Player of the series is going to go to Shaden. I really didn't think about this all that much. This was a very obvious decision for me 10-0-24 is obviously a great scoreline, but like when you watch these games, it is very clear. Game 1, he's absolutely obliterating people on the brand. In Game 2, his setups, his engages, his creation, especially in the early game, it completely destroys everything that CCG wants to do, and they're never really able to recover and actually play these games out from neutral, which is obviously not ideal for them. The pressure he was showing on the top side of the map in particular, it really made Crimson's life a lot more difficult. It got Surdy into these really dominant positions, and then you just get these game takeover types of performances from Surdy flanking on the Renekton, or these awesome Rumble ultimates that he's able to put out, kind of making up for some poor Rumble performances early on in the split. So Shaden looking great, being able to enable all of that, really playing his game and not really being stopped at any point. And then Surdy obviously kind of being the damage carry throughout a lot of this series. Both of them really linking up. They needed to be the two stars for this team, in my opinion, in this series, not only because of the matchup. You know, mid lane, not exactly a matchup that I think favors FlyQuest all that much in terms of how things have gone this year. And then, you know, bot lane I don't think is, like, it's definitely better for Fly, but I don't think Rockboom and Trevor are going to be bad at all. I think you were looking at the top side of the map as something that Fly could potentially take advantage of in terms of the matchup, and Shaden and Surdy went ahead and did that. So really important for that, for them in that I guess, area. And then Bradley, you know, I talked about the mid lane matchup on paper not necessarily being super FlyQuest favored just because of Bradley over the course of this split. He's just kind of been an average mid laner for this team, but he was really good in that game too. The damage he was able to output on Corki was tremendously important. Shochi was pretty solid on the other side. Certainly the win condition in both of these games for CCG, but it just wasn't enough. Sajet and Chime were also pretty solid down on the bot side. I certainly am not going to criticize them at all. I've been the biggest Chime fan in the universe over the course of this split, and I'm going to continue to do that. But again, this is big, not only because of the outcome influencing the playoffs, but just because we needed to see FlyQuest get on the same page, and we needed to see their macro actually look even remotely decent in the back half of the game, and I think they did that. I still think they are super reliant on early game leads and being able to out-tempo other teams, but they should be able to do that at least relatively frequently with the amount of talent they have on this team. And then for CCG on the other side, it's really unfortunate. Again, I still think this team is probably a top 8 team. I still don't think talent-wise they are a bottom 2 team, but they only picked up wins against the teams that they quote-unquote should pick up wins against. They beat AOE, they beat Winthrop, and they beat Blue Otter, who obviously are you know, streaking at the moment, but at the time, that was the expected result, and they just weren't able to get the upsets that teams like Winthrop were able to get, and that means that they fall to number 9 at 3 and 6, and it's really just an unfortunate set of circumstances. I think Shochi was pretty good for a majority of this split. Maybe not the dominant self that he has shown at times in the past. It certainly wasn't what he was last year for Fear, where he was like legitimately one of the top, you know, 1 or 2 mid laners in the NACL. I still think he was also better on Supernova in the spring split, but how much of that is circumstance? Because CCG really didn't have a ton of winning lanes or pressure in a lot of, you know, situations. I don't really know. I still trust Shochi to be a very talented NACL mid laner, and honestly, I still think he can be an LCS talent like as soon as next year, but I really would like to see kind of a bounce back performance from him after he was just kind of okay over the course of this split. I think Rockboom and Trevor tried their best to come in and do something. Kryra, I actually thought was fine for this team. I'm not going to call him like a just straight up upgrade, but I really like his development track. I think he's a very interesting player. I really hope to see him in the NACL next split. Crimson's a player that has gotten better, I would say, over the course of the split. Unfortunately, a lot of attention put on the top side, and that means he's going to get dud of the series here. I don't even think it was entirely his fault. Generally, he played fine, but Surdy was definitely more impactful, and Shaden definitely put a lot of time and effort into making sure that very aggressive player in Crimson wasn't in a good position to be able to carry. So it's really just a sad end for CCG. I think they're better than this. They're better than this result, but it's just the way the cookie crumbles. They're going to have to win their way back into the NACL because they've locked themselves in bottom 2. But for FlyQuest, again, really nice win, but it's all going to be about whether or not they can carry this momentum into playoffs. As the defending champions, you're kind of hoping and assuming that they're just going to be able to keep it rocking and keep it rolling, but so far it's been a little bit more rocky than that. This win at least shows that in the right circumstances, they can still dominate like they could a couple of months ago. But then moving on now to day number 2, and we've still got some playoff seeding to end up determining here, and that kicks off with a matchup between Disguised and Blue Otter. And Blue Otter continues their ridiculously hot streak at the moment by picking up yet another win here, this time 2-0 over DSG. This DSG team is very hard to figure out because I think during a lot of the regular season they were winning games that I just didn't feel like they were ahead in. Even their wins didn't feel all that convincing to me, but Tomo was so good for this team. He was likely the most valuable player in the entire league to their individual roster that they were able to get over certain teams that maybe they would would typically lose to. The Team Liquid series, I think, was a really great example of that, but once Tomo left, even replacing him with someone like Manui, who I think is a very good player, somebody who I think is solid enough at this level and has experience playing with Poom, obviously from last split, you don't really have to, like, reteach comms, is probably pretty comfortable playing with the pieces that you already have. Like, it's not going to be the same, and unfortunately, that has kind of been the case for DSG, and on the flip side of that, Blue Otter has been as hot as they've been all year long. This team is really, really peaking at the right time. Some of their players are really starting to emerge as some of the best in their individual roles in the entire league, and it's really fun to watch. This was a very complete effort from Blue Otter, and I think they're going to be very excited about that. Player of the series is once again going to go to Levitate. This guy's been on an absolute rampage over the last couple of weeks. He has truly been one of the best AD carries in the entire league. Full stop. It's not even really all that up for debate. This guy is playing out of his mind right now, and I know a lot of people, me included, had really high expectations for Levitate coming into the NACL for the first time this split, but he has exceeded every single one of those. You know, if it weren't for a lot of the other ADCs that have been popping off basically the entire split, Levitate might be in that conversation for the best AD carry in the NACL. Hell, he might still be in that right now in terms of, you know, where he is at and the performances that he's giving. Rovex obviously has a lot to do with that. He's an incredibly good support, but Levitate has really become the star of this team, and it's really fun to watch. I do really want to shout out Music, though. I thought Music had a fantastic series in the jungle. The Maokai, the Viego, really aggressive pathing, and a lot of really bold decisions actually really put Blue Otter ahead. You know, I've been both up and down on Music over the course of his NACL tenure. Obviously, going back to his time on Supernova, it was a bit different, but I think his split on Blue Otter has definitely been a massive improvement from him in terms of consistency, and I'm really excited to be able to say that. Yukino on the other side of this matchup, he's not been particularly good, in my opinion, over the course of this split, and so for Music to be able to go into that matchup against somebody who is struggling a bit and actually be able to take advantage of that, pretty massive for Blue Otter. Music and Levitate definitely the standouts, but Samikin continues to look really good on some more comfort picks, things like Lux, things like Hui. Obviously, we know he likes to play those mages. The Vex has been coming out in recent weeks. I'm never going to fault Comfort in a full Fearless league, especially when you're playing as well as Samikin is. At the moment, Quacker is obviously somebody that I've praised a lot in the past. Very aggressive, very risky player, but when it works, it really works. His mechanics are top-notch, and we already spoke about Rovex in a really positive manner. Blue Otter, with this win at 4-5, they're now sitting at 11-12 in terms of their game score. They just skyrocketed up in terms of the standings. They're going to finish this regular season in 5th place. They're going to be the number 5 seed heading into the playoffs. That's ginormous for Blue Otter. That gives them that extra life. It guarantees that, first of all, they don't have to face FlyQuest in the first round, which is obviously ideal, but also that you can lose. Like, you can lose one series, you can lose a best of 3, it can go a little flippy, and you can still keep your hopes alive. That is such an advantage for those teams that end up making top 6 in the playoffs. So congratulations to Blue Otter. They have absolutely earned it over the last couple of weeks. Their wins are important. They're not just beating bad teams. They've beaten Liquid and FlyQuest and now DSG. These are like real playoff teams. And so credit to Blue Otter. And then for Disguised on the other side, I just don't know how to feel about this team. Quite frankly, I'm pretty pessimistic about this team moving forward. I just don't really think they have that player that they can play through. Again, Tomo was 1v9ing a lot of games for this team before he was called up to 100 Thieves, and now that he's gone, I just don't really know what the win condition for them is, because I think quite a few of the other players on this team just aren't playing all that well at the current moment. Yukino is going to get my dud of the series. I'm going to be honest, I was really expecting Yukino to come in and be one of the better junglers in the league, maybe not like a star, like not, you know, Shaden levels of just like what he was doing last split, or Yuji, you know, what he was doing last split of just dominating every single game. But somebody that I expected to come in and be like a top 4, top 5 jungler at this level. That has really just not been the case. I've honestly not really been all that impressed with his gameplay, and I think the tempo is really just not there for DSG right now. I think when you're looking at a player like Young, he's doing really well in these fights when he is able to get gold, but he's not exactly pushing the tempo of the team incredibly high. They're not really putting a lot of resources into him in the same way that they were with Tomo, and just like asking him to carry games, even if he is generating those resources on his own. Manui and Poom, I think they're generally fine. Like, I've never been the biggest fan of Poom in terms of the gameplay that he has shown. It's just not something that I've ever really, you know, been like, wow, this guy's dominating. Manui, I think, is still trying to integrate himself into the team, and these two had, you know, up and down chemistry, we'll just say, in the spring split anyways, and so, you know, I'm not entirely enthused about, you know, whether or not this bot lane's just going to completely turn it around. Tenacity is a player I believe in, but there's only so much you can do from the top side of the map. I'm not really sure where DSG lands. This loss is actually bad for them. We talked about Blue Otter getting that second life, getting to the number 5 seed. With this loss, DSG is guaranteed to get the number 7 seed in the playoffs. That's really bad. That's no extra life. That's immediately slotted into the lower bracket, and that's really not where DSG wanted to be. The expectations of this team were incredibly high, and unfortunately, they've just not been met so far this split. Maybe they can go on another playoff run like they did last split, but who really knows? Right now, it's not looking particularly good for them. And then, like I said, for Blue Otter, it's just all sunshines and rainbows right now. We'll see what happens when this team actually gets into the playoffs. They've looked so good in their limited opportunities in the back half of the regular season, but there have been stretches where they've looked a lot more inconsistent than what they look like right now. And so, which version of the Otters are you going to get in the playoffs? I think it's already such a major fun and big selling point for the league that we're even asking that question in the first place. But then moving on to our fourth and final series of the week and our final series of the regular season here in the NACL. And it's certainly an intriguing one in terms of just vibes. It's Supernova taking on AOE Esports. Technically, this did absolutely have playoff implications. If Supernova had 2-0'd this series, which is entirely possible, it certainly wasn't off the table, they would have actually been the number 2 seed going into the playoffs with Fear's loss, but they couldn't quite do that. They couldn't quite get there, and so they are going to drop all the way down to number 4 because they have the tiebreaker with FlyQuest, and FlyQuest beat them earlier on in the split, so Supernova does end up dropping down to that number 4 seed. Certainly not ideal for them, but I'm going to be honest, I'm really not surprised to see AOE take a game here, not because I think Supernova is bad, but because AOE has this ridiculous knack of winning a game and then losing the series. They are the kings of losing 1-2. I don't think I've ever seen an 0-9 team win 7 games throughout the split. It's like genuinely insane in a best of 3 format for them to have only lost 0-2 twice in their entire split. So really funny stuff there, but obviously AOE, the number 10 team, they were not coming out of that. They're going down into the promotion tournament. They have been for the last 3 weeks. They've already known that. They've made their roster changes to try to give themselves the best possible chance of getting back into the NACL. They showed some interesting things here, but at the end of the day, Supernova was just better. Player of the series to me is going to go to Toasty in the mid lane. I'm all in on Toasty at this point. I think this guy could be a future star, not only here at the NACL level. I definitely think he is a potential future LCS mid laner. In terms of what he has shown off, the consistency definitely needs to improve a tiny bit, but the upside, the good games, they're absolutely there. I think the mechanics are there, the macro is there. He's kind of just a very strong, well-rounded player. I think we didn't know what we were getting with Toasty coming into the year when he was picked up by Fear, but even on Fear last split, he was awesome, a primary carry for that team. He comes over here to Supernova, and he's excellent as well. Truly one of the more interesting players right now in the NACL. I think next year could be a big year for him to kind of take over the league and really cement himself as one of the top prospects in the North American system. I really do think that that's possible for him moving forward. I do want to give a shout out to both Kenvi and Lens. I think both of them were excellent at different times in this series. Kenvi could have been a bit more aggressive in terms of some of his engages, but at the end of the day, he still played very calm, cool, and collected, and he was definitely the better jungler here. And Lens did a good job of capitalizing when things were kind of given to him. I don't think he's not the most aggressive AD carry. He's not the kind of player that's going to step up and create a ton of stuff on his own. It's just not really been what he has shown to do, or at least it's not what he's been asked to do on any of the teams he's been on just yet. But the Xayah in Game 2, even the Kalista to an extent in Game 3, both very important towards the team's success because he wasn't really giving over disadvantages. He was generating a lot of gold, playing cool, calm, and collected, and again, being that really stable AD carry for this team to be able to rely on. I'm a big fan of Diamond. I've been very vocal about that. Faisal is one of the better top laners in the league. Supernova is a scary team. They're not a team that you can underrate or underestimate. They're going to be a team that competes for a top 2, top 3 spot in the playoffs if everything ends up going well. They can make finals. I truly believe that, but we'll have to see. There are some inconsistencies with this team, and generally speaking, they're not the most experienced team in the world, and so we'll have to see where that ends up going. But for AOE on the other side, they are what they are. I think the Game 1 win was obviously very nice from them. I thought Mobility in particular played awesome. Breezy was excellent in Game 1 on the Rel. The setups to the bullet times were incredible from AOE, and they were able to play around that very consistently. The problem was the last 2 games were a lot more of the AOE that we've grown accustomed to. Cozy, unfortunately, is going to get my dud of the series here, the Yasuo game in particular. In Game 2, just not useful, not good, really. The Mundo didn't really do anything in Game 3. You know, Cozy's an interesting player. Haven't really seen a ton of tape on him, but from what I've seen at the NACL level, he seems fine. We'll see what ends up happening in the promotion tournament, but Faisal is a really hard opponent to go into, and so, you know, I'm not going to blame him too much. City Witty also just overextending, especially in Game 2 on the Amumu. I think he had like 11 or 12 deaths in that game, just something like that. Outside of that, he was pretty good, but that Amumu game was definitely very rough. Game 2 in general, I thought was pretty up and down for Supernova. Kind of a bloodbath, or for AOE. Kind of a bloodbath off the back of Onat looking pretty strong on the Zeri and trying to do a lot of things, mobility being pretty strong on the Jhin. They just couldn't end up closing it out. But like I said, bot lane looking solid. Onat, I think, has looked pretty good ever since getting reinserted back into this team and coming back into pro. You know, I was pretty high on Onat last split, and so it's nice to see that he's been able to carry over some of that momentum. But if mobility and Breezy are going to be a strong bot lane, they more than have a chance of getting back into the NACL going into next year, even if I'm not super sold on the top side of the map just yet. So we'll see what ends up happening with AOE. 0-9 is obviously very unfortunate. I'm sure they're not entirely happy about that, but they definitely have a chance. I think they looked okay here in this series, but Supernova going to be looking towards the playoffs. Their matchup is certainly very interesting. It's a bit of a budding rivalry here in the NACL in round number 1 that I'm excited to talk about, but I like the Supernova team. I think they're pretty solid, and honestly, again, I really would not be shocked if they end up making a playoff run. All right, but that is going to do it for my NACL week number 9 overview and analysis video, and you might be seeing up on the screen, it's not the standings, it's not the power rankings, it's the playoff bracket. We know what the playoff bracket's going to look like at this point, so we can go ahead and go over it. Of course, the first 2 seeds, Dragonsteel and Starforge, are going to get buys in round number 1. That's the advantage of getting a top 2 seed, but we have our first round matchups. It's the number 4 Supernova taking on number 5 Blue Otter. Big rivalry matchup with how much trash talk there was on Twitter the last time these two teams played for them to play at the start of the playoffs. That's awesome. You know, dream scenario here for content. And then the 3-seeded FlyQuest Challengers taking on the 6-seed Team Liquid Challengers. It's the 2 LCS-affiliated orgs taking on each other in the first round. You couldn't really ask for better first-round matchups, in my opinion, in terms of how things ended up going. Of course, you've got 2 teams slotted into the lower bracket, number 7-seeded Disguise, and of course, number 8-seeded Winthrop University, who didn't play this week because they had already finished their schedule. So, you know, a lot to look forward to here. I'm not going to do a full bracket prediction or anything like that. I think that it's pretty volatile here in the NACL, but if you do want to know my prediction for the bracket, I did do one, and it's over on my Twitter. It's in the replies somewhere. Blue Otter is holding a contest where if you can pick the best bracket, then you can win an RP gift card. Go participate in it. Show Blue Otter some support, and check out the bracket if you're interested. It's on the Twitter. Go follow me there. I post about League of Legends stuff, as you would expect, but that's the bracket. I really do think that a lot of things can happen. A lot of these teams are interesting. They're really not all that separated, especially in terms of consistency, so I'm really looking forward to the playoffs, but let's move on to the player of the week and the dud of the week, and actually a little bit more than that this week. We'll talk about that in just a second. Let's kick it off with the player of the week and the dud of the week, though. Player of the week for me in week 9 is going to go to Shaden, the jungler for FlyQuest Challengers. I thought Shaden was unbelievable this week in both of their games. He really just was able to dominate that series like we haven't seen in a little while. Shaden is one of those players that obviously had an LCS job at the beginning of the year before they found out that Evil Geniuses was going to be selling their spot, and he's really been making the most of it here in the NACL. He looked great. My honorable mentions, they're the exact same honorable mentions as last week. It's Levitate, the AD carry for Blue Water, and Toasty, the mid laner for Supernova. Both of them were unbelievable in their series this week, and I really didn't feel the need to change the graphic. They were both deserving of honorable mentions in the same way that they were last week. They've been some of the more consistent players. And then unfortunately, dud of the week is going to go to Winsome, the support for Starforge. I like Winsome. I think he's going to be just fine. I don't think dud of the week here is any sort of indicator that he's like Dunzo or going to be a hindrance to Fear moving forward. I just don't think he played particularly well against Dragonsteel in their series. I think if you talk about, you know, what I expect from him in the playoffs, I think he's one of the better and more consistent supports in the league. And so I'm really not all that worried, but I would be remiss to not mention that he wasn't particularly good against Dragonsteel. So he's going to get my dud of the week for week 9, and Shaden is going to get my player of the week. But it's time to talk about my all-pro team, and you can see it up on the screen here. Of course, I'll go down it really quick. In top lane, it's Zamudo from Dragonsteel. In the jungle, it's UG from Dragonsteel. In the mid lane, it's Ablaze Olive from Starforge. In the AD carry role, it's Scary Jerry from Dragonsteel, and in the support position, it's Chime from FlyQuest Challengers. That, to me, is the all-pro team from the NACL this split in terms of performances. You know, I definitely considered quite a few players in each role as well. In the top lane, obviously, Surdy was someone that I very heavily considered. I thought thought his individual performances were the highest in terms of like the best games. He had the best games of any top laner, but he was way more inconsistent than he was in the spring split, in my opinion, and it held me back. I thought Zamudo was excellent, and I wanted to really point that out. You can see Yuji actually has a bit of a different color behind him. He's my MVP pick. He's my most valuable prospect pick. He won it last split, and honestly, I think he was better this split. That's how good I think Yuji has been. Dragonsteel has been so dominant, and they run almost everything through him. To me, this is a very obvious selection. I've never been right about this in the past. In terms of the NACL, my MVP picks are very rarely on point with the rest of the league, but, you know, we'll see. Yuji is definitely my vote here. For a Blaze Olive in the mid lane, this one also feels relatively obvious. There have been some players that have definitely, you know, risen up in those rankings over the past couple of weeks. I think someone like a Toasty was definitely considered for me as, you know, one of the more interesting mid laners in the league. I think Spyrax is somebody that I obviously go to bat for a lot, but I don't think anybody had a bigger role on their team than ABO, who was the carry for Fearx Starforge in a lot of their wins, and as the number 2 team, that's pretty darn good. Scary Jerry, the final member of Dragonsteel here, this was the hardest one to pick. There were so many AD carries. Jerry probably would not have won this had Tomo still been in the league. I think obviously DSG probably would have finished a bit better, but Tomo probably is the MVP, the most valuable prospect. If he plays the entire split, he was on pace to win that pretty easily from me, and so, you know, I think Jerry's still great. Obviously, I've sung his praises so much on this channel that I don't think anybody's going to consider me a Scary Jerry hater, but wanted to point that out. Also, Levitate being as good as he has been in the recent weeks, honestly started to force his way into this conversation, which I certainly was not expecting, but he has been amazing. And then support, I went with Chime. I do think that he is the most consistent support, and I've been really singing his praises a lot over the course of this split, but of course, if you wanted to put Zyko up here with Scary Jerry, I think that makes the most sense, but I really do think Chime was actively winning games and was FlyQuest's probably most consistent player over the course of this split. So that's my all-pro team. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with down in the comments section below. Always love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions down there, but that's going to do it for my regular season coverage. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the NACL, although we will be posting about the NACL every single round of the playoffs as per usual, but we post about all 4 of the major regions and their playoffs as well, which are kicking off basically everywhere around the world. If you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it, especially with Worlds right around the corner. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. Hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.